feel like the financial cost of extreme weather just keeps hitting these, well, unthinkable new highs, you are definitely not wrong. Welcome to the deep dive. We've really been immersed in the latest data. We're talking NOAA, government agencies, and some major players in global finance, trying to understand this catastrophic new normal. Just look at this front page shocker. The first half of 2025, it logged the most expensive extreme weather on record, period. Estimates for just January through June rocketed up somewhere between, $93 billion and $126 billion.
Yeah, that upper end, $126 billion. It's staggering.
It absolutely crushed the previous 6-month record. That was $57 billion set just 2 years ago in 2023.
Right. And that kind of acceleration, it really demands a deep dive, doesn't it? So our mission today is to pull apart these sources, analyze this rapidly escalating financial trend, and really critically identify the two major forces driving it. And maybe before we jump in, just a bit of context on some sources. When we talk about reports from companies like Munich Re, for instance, we're talking about reinsurers. Now, these are basically the companies that insure the insurance companies.
Right, the insurer's insurance.
Exactly. They handle the ultimate global risks, and their financial models. They often tell the clearest, sometimes the most brutal story about where the planet's risk is really concentrated. And just to give you a key takeaway right off the bat, something that really shows the speed of change. A little nugget for you. In the past 6 years, the United States has averaged only 18 days between billion-dollar disasters.
18 days?
18. Now, contrast that with the 1980s. Back then, the country averaged 82 days between events of that magnitude.
Wow, 82 down to 18.
Yeah. We are essentially cycling through these massive financial catastrophes 4 times faster than we used to.
That compressed timeline? I mean, that's incredibly significant, isn't it?
Yeah.
It has to completely change how we approach risk, recovery, everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second. Consider the sheer scale of wealth that's just been erased globally before we drill down on why the U.S. data looks so intense.
Well, when you look at the worldwide figures since 1980, the number is just colossal. Natural disaster losses, adjusted for inflation, have totaled U.S. $6.9 trillion.
$6.9 trillion.
Trillion. It represents staggering wealth. Think about it like the combined gross domestic product of major economies like the UK and India put together.
That kind of loss is hard to truly grasp.
Yeah.
But I think what hits closer to home for most people actually affected is, well, the insurance gap. Right? The share of that loss is completely uninsured.
Exactly.
Where people just have to bear the financial pain entirely on their own.
And globally, that gap is massive. About 67% of those losses, that's 2 out of every $3 were uninsured.
2/3. Wow.
Yeah. And in developing nations where resilience is often already quite low, the insured portion, it often falls well under 10%. I mean, the financial devastation on communities without that insurance backing, it's almost total.
Okay, now coming back to the U.S., we have the most detailed data here. Partly, I suppose, because the U.S. is such a prime example of high-value assets exposed to this increasing risk. Since 2016, the U.S. has endured, what was the number, 122 separate billion-dollar weather events.
That's right, 122 since 2016. And when you tally up the cost of those events, the total damages now exceed $1 trillion.
$1 trillion, just since 2016.
And tragically, they've claimed over 5,000 lives in that same period. It's hard to overstate the magnitude of accumulating $1 trillion in weather damage in less than a decade.
And 2022 really stands out as a landmark year in this acceleration, doesn't it?
It really does. It was the 3rd most costly year since records began back in 1980, and it was driven largely by one single event, Hurricane Ian.
Ah, yes, Ian, Florida.
Ian caused $112.9 billion in economic damages when it hit Florida. That made it the 3rd costliest hurricane on record, and the deadliest storm since Katrina. It was almost a preview, really, of the scale of destruction we'd see just 3 years later in 2025.
Okay, so if the time frame between these billion-dollar events has shrunk from 82 days down to 18, what on earth explains this hyperacceleration? We know it's probably not just one cause. We've been calling it the two-headed monster.
Yeah.
These two massive interconnected forces driving up the costs.
Exactly. So driver A, that's climate change intensification. Scientists are quite clear that global heating is, supercharging these impacts. Think about it. A warmer atmosphere holds more moisture, right? That leads to more intense bursts of rainfall, which causes devastating floods.
More fuel for the storms.
Precisely. We're also seeing longer, much more intense wildfire seasons because of drier conditions. And of course, the amplification of hurricane strength, especially that rapid intensification we saw with Ian.
Okay, let's unpack a specific term that comes up in those reinsurer reports you mentioned, secondary perils. Because we often focus on the big spectacle, the Category 5 hurricane.
Yeah.
But you're saying those aren't actually the main engine of this rising cost trend.
That's right. They're not the primary driver of the trend itself.
Right.
While those peak risks, like massive hurricanes, they cause huge, huge fluctuations year to year, the relentless accelerating trend in losses, that's really being driven by these non-peak or secondary perils.
Okay, like what?
Think severe thunderstorms, hail, localized flooding, smaller wildfires. These kinds of events, they're now frequent enough and intense enough that they cause massive sustained costs that just compound year after year after year.
And 2025 gave us some shocking examples of that intensification. That first half of the year, logging that record cost up to $126 billion. That sounds like driver A working overtime.
You really see the intensity across the board. I mean, take the tornado milestones in 2025. On June 20th, near Enderlin, North Dakota, we saw the confirmation of the first EF5 tornado in 12 years.
EF5, the highest category.
The highest. Confirmed by, get this, the violent lofting of several train cars. That kind of intensity in peak events is terrifying, yes, but it's also complemented by just the sheer velocity of activity, like that March outbreak that caused $6.25 billion in damage alone.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, I think, because that brings us directly to driver B, the expanding bullseye effect. So climate change loads the gun, right? But we keep pulling the trigger by building more and more wealth in the riskiest possible location.
Exactly.
The financial destruction isn't just because the weather's worse. It's because the targets are bigger and they're more valuable.
This is the absolute critical land use factor, the physical exposure. It has just exploded. You see this clearly in the U.S.
What?
Urban land area grew from less than 1% of the country back in 1949.
Less than 1%?
Yeah, to 3.3% in 2017. And the urban population itself just ballooned. So you have more people, higher value homes, critical infrastructure, all concentrated directly in these high-risk zones.
And the single most damaging event of that record-breaking 2025 period. It personally illustrates this amplification, doesn't it? We're talking about the Los Angeles wildfires in January 2025.
Yes. Those weren't just big fires. They immediately became the most costly wildfires in U.S. history and actually world history, precisely because they burned through high-value single-family homes in really wealthy areas. Pacific Palisades, Eaton Canyon.
Right into those communities.
Right into them. The property damage estimates were just staggering. $53 billion up to $65 billion in direct losses.
And cost was maximized because it was that perfect storm of both drivers, right?
Yeah.
Climate and land use.
Precisely. That specific event was a sort of a 1-2-3 punch. You had the strong Santa Ana winds, extremely dry conditions, that's driver A, climate change, combined with the massive fuel buildup from, well, a century of fire suppression policy, which is really a self-inflicted land use issue.
Right. Trying to stop all fires led to bigger ones later.
Yeah, more fuel. And all of that hitting expensive, densely populated urban areas, that's driver B, the bullseye. The tornado data shows this perfectly, too, the actual number or strength of tornadoes globally. It might not be changing dramatically, but the damage, it's increasing like crazy because we've simply built more homes and infrastructure right across Tornado Alley and the Great Plains.
So, okay, we have this rapid, frankly terrifying, record-breaking rise in costs, but there's an interesting, maybe somewhat hopeful paradox when we look at the human cost versus the financial cost. Let's maybe move into our final segment on mitigation and future risk.
Yeah, the safety paradox. It's a really crucial part of the story. While the destruction and the financial costs are rising dramatically, we actually haven't seen an equally dramatic increase in fatalities for most of these visible storms.
Really, despite the higher cost.
Yes, and this is largely a testament to technological advances. Better weather forecasting, much better warning systems. These things help get people out of the way.
The data really highlights this success story, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, compare Hurricane Harvey in 2017. Huge damage, $160 billion, but 89 deaths.
Okay.
Now contrast that with, say, the 1995 Midwest heat wave. That caused only $2 billion in damage, but tragically killed 872 people.
Huge difference. So forecasting is better for certain things.
Very good at tracking large, visible, high wind events like hurricanes and tornadoes. You can see them coming. You can warn people.
However, the future challenges and maybe where we might see future spikes in fatalities seem to be shifting Shifting toward threats that aren't so easy to forecast or maybe just harder to avoid.
That's the concern. Experts are most worried now about heat and flooding for future fatalities. Heat waves, they affect huge areas, huge populations, and vulnerable groups often just lack the means to escape the heat. You can't just evacuate from heat easily.
Right.
And flooding is similarly insidious, often harder to avoid than a tracked storm moving in. Economically, the projections for flooding alone are terrifying.
Not a bad.
By 2050, flood losses are projected to increase by 147% in Louisiana and 74% in Florida relative to just 2020 losses. Huge jumps.
And finally, there's a policy note here. Some of the increasing losses, it seems, appear to be the very definition of a self-inflicted wound.
Yeah, that's certainly the consensus among risk experts we looked at. There's high concern that proposed government funding cuts to essential monitoring and response agencies like FEMA and NOAA.
The agencies that track and respond.
Exactly. The worry is that cutting their funding will inevitably lead to increased disaster losses down the line, losses that would far outweigh any temporary budget savings. It just seems like short-sighted decision-making in the face of clearly escalating risk.
Okay. So we've unpacked the global cost, that $6.9 trillion figure. We've looked at the trillion dimes accumulated just in the U.S. since 2016. We've discussed the dual causation, climate intensification loading the gun, and the expanding bullseye effect putting more in the line of fire. We've seen the extreme acceleration in recent years like 2025.
So, what does this all mean? I think it means we are really in an accelerating cycle. Human choices, specifically where we choose to build and how we manage those environments, are intercepting directly with climate intensification. And it's creating unprecedented and frankly predictable financial risk. The data just shows it again and again. The most desirable places to build high-value homes. Along hurricane-prone coasts in beautiful but fire-prone canyons, they are also the most exposed.
Which leads us to the provocative thought we want to leave you with this week. Given that the U.S. is, well, still seeing an uptick in planet heating emissions, and the cost of building in these high-risk areas is clearly skyrocketing, should the focus shift? Shift away from merely forecasting the next disaster towards fundamentally rethinking where and how we build our communities, even if those high-risk areas are, as one source put it, beautiful 99.9% of the time, something to mull over.
Definitely something to think about. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.